one more mic check. Should be about 5 minutes. You guys ready? Mic check, mic check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Good? Good? All right, cool. Yeah, should be about 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here with our partners who advocate for older adults here in the Commonwealth, and as a member of the older adult community, I'm particularly excited to have them with us. We're here today to talk a little bit about why it's important between now and the end of this legislative session we see some tax relief for older adults and other folks who are scrambling to deal with the impact of inflation here in Massachusetts. People everywhere obviously are facing rising prices and pressures from inflation, and according to the Consumer Price Index, inflation rose by 8.6% in the United States during May. That's the fastest rate of growth for inflation ever recorded. Seniors, many of whom, probably most of whom, are on fixed incomes, are among those that are hardest hit by these pressures. Meanwhile, the state's tax revenue collections continue to come in significantly over benchmark. We ended last year with a $5 billion surplus in revenues each month, and calendar year 2022 have come in hundreds of millions of dollars above this benchmark. And earlier this month, we announced that we'll deposit almost $2 billion into the state's rainy day fund due to stronger than expected capital gains tax revenues, which will drive the value of the stabilization fund to $6.6 billion, its highest level ever, by a wide margin. especially at a time of inflation, high gas prices, high food prices, high rent costs, and rising prices across the board. We think it's time to give some of this extra revenue back to the people who earned it in the first place, the taxpayers of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Our plan is comprehensive. It would provide relief for low-income residents, for renters, for seniors, for working families, and more. It would also make changes to make us more competitive, particularly when it comes to our estate tax, where Massachusetts has the least competitive estate tax in the country. Specifically, our bill makes the following changes to provide relief for older adults. It would double the maximum senior circuit breaker tax credit, which is available to low-income senior homeowners and renters. The credit's adjusted annually for inflation, and in 2021, it would have raised the credit to $2,340, and it would provide about $60 million in tax relief to about 100,000 seniors. Our proposal would also increase the deduction cap, the rental deduction cap, from $3,000 to $5,000. The deduction is 50% of rent, currently capped at $3,000. This adjustment would provide about $77 million in tax relief to 881,000 renters, many of whom are seniors. The bill would also double the dependent care credit and double the household dependent care credit. This would benefit more than 700,000 families and unpaid caregivers with about $167 million in tax credits. And our plan would also increase the state income tax thresholds for no tax status to $12,000 for single filers, $24,800 for joint filers, and $18,650 for heads of households, which will eliminate the income tax for more than 234,000 low-income filers. This income adjustment would be felt most across our hardest-hit cities and towns. Of that $44 million in savings, nearly $12 million would be in the 20 hardest-hit so-called equity communities here in Massachusetts. These are the 20 cities that DPH has identified as having been hardest hit by COVID, given the disproportionate racial impact of the virus. And I have to say, it's always troubled me that Massachusetts, which is a progressive state and believes in doing the right thing for many of our lowest income workers, has a lower no tax threshold than the federal government does for dealing with these issues. This legislation would also make two changes that makes Massachusetts more competitive. It would double the estate tax threshold and eliminate the current cliff effect that taxes the full amount below the threshold. A very small number of states actually have an estate tax in the first place. No state has an estate tax that's as aggressive as the estate tax in Massachusetts, which is why so many Democrats in our legislature, as well as Republicans, support doing something about it. And it would also change the short-term capital gains tax to the personal income tax rate of 5%, which would align the Commonwealth with the vast majority of other states. These proposals represent about $700 million in tax relief and would support, obviously, millions of people here in Massachusetts who could really use the help. The tax cuts are extremely affordable, as I said before. We've never been in the kind of situation wherein, with respect to our statewide finances overall, and most importantly, they would provide relief for seniors and working families at a time when they could really use the help. We know the legislature is interested in this. We've had lots of conversations on and off the record with our colleagues in the House and the Senate, and we urge them to make sure that this issue doesn't get lost between now and the end of the session, and that they make this part of what happens by July 31st. And with that, I will turn it over to Secretary Heffernan.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you all for being here today. Let me just spend a minute on where the Commonwealth is financially. But first, where we've come from. I know I'm not alone in feeling that in the beginning of the pandemic was a lot longer than 2 years ago. For a lot of us, I think it feels like 10. But if you might recall, the administration and the legislature joined together for 2 economic roundtables back in 2020, the first in April and then again in October. The overall theme for most presentations at the event was general uncertainty, and that the majority of economists here and across the country predicted that revenues would decline. More than 2 years later, the Massachusetts and the U.S. economy face different kinds of uncertainty. However, the Commonwealth's financial position is not one of them. It is historically strong. Through May, we have collected $36.9 billion, which is $2.6 billion or 7.2% 7.8% ahead of revised projections. This comes on the back of a $5 billion tax surplus in fiscal year 2021. The balance of our stabilization fund has never been stronger. As the governor mentioned, and we are making the deposit, so we will be putting just under $2 billion into the stabilization fund. That figure will push the capital gains number to $6.6 billion, the highest by a large margin ever in the history of the Commonwealth. Since those economic forums 2 years ago, we've worked alongside the legislature to make massive investments in acute areas of need throughout the pandemic. Among them, over $1 billion towards stabilizing child care, more than $1 billion in housing and rental assistance for individuals and families in crisis, more than $700 million to support hurting businesses, and hundreds of millions for human service providers. We still have a lot of work to do with the ARPA funds and nearly $10 billion in proposals for transportation and environmental initiatives. Fortunately, the Commonwealth has ample resources to continue investing in priority areas across the board like child care, education, housing, the workforce, economic development, all the while still implementing these impactful tax relief measures. It's time to make a targeted investment directly in those who were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic and who continue to face the steepest climb to regaining stability, like our seniors. We can afford to provide this tax relief now and on an ongoing basis. And we also believe that in returning some of our surplus tax revenue is the right thing to do, to provide much-needed tax relief to hundreds of thousands of hard-working taxpayers after 2 difficult years, and to improve our competitiveness as a state and help ensure continued strength of our economy in the long term. We have a great opportunity before us, and we are focused on continuing the great work we've done with the legislature throughout the pandemic to get another fiscally prudent initiative over the finish line and make these tax policies changes a reality. I'll now pass it over to Mike Festa, President of AARP Massachusetts. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you, Governor. Let me just start by making an observation. We are, as has been now discussed by the 2 previous speakers, we're in a very important period of time in the convolution of a lot of issues that affect people's lives. And one of the things we can rejoice at is the acknowledgement that the economy in this state, income, revenue, the things that one would first look to as to whether or not any good idea of fiscal policy is going to have an impact, that we have that starting point of good news. But I think it's important also to put in context, at AARP, a couple of quick points to be made. We know today that 6 out of 10 seniors over the age of 60 defined are economically insecure. The reality and the imposition of additional inflationary pressures, all of the costs associated, the increases with rental income and property taxes, et cetera, it all comes together. And then you ask the question, what's the real impact? The real impact on seniors, frankly, is there's a lot of suffering in silence. There's a lot of desperation economically, and AARP feels very strongly, and we applaud the governor in recognizing that if you can't do it now, when do we do such things? As acknowledge the struggle that many taxpayers have who are, let's talk about property taxes. This is not a surprise to anybody in this room or those listening. Many of the folks who have worked hard all their lives to hold on to that home are in that fixed income situation, and the struggle to stay at home is a combination of that cost of paying the bill, the cost associated with other standard of living that impacts living in that house, but then there's this other thing. How do you stay at home longer if you start to need supports in home, caregiving supports? How do you practically hold on to the thing that you've struggled to build all these years? And it starts with an understanding that a lot of folks are in a place now where the laws have not caught up with the impact of these tax credits with the reality of what they can afford. So the first and foremost point about property tax relief is we think the governor's got it right. It's important to raise that threshold so that you're capturing more realistically the out-of-pocket cost of paying property taxes. Now let me speak to the point about caregivers. You know, the governor's proposal, which, again, we strongly support, and said so, by the way, before the legislature when they had a hearing on this bill in February, is to acknowledge the fact that, you know, when we ask the question, how are we impacting the budget in the reverse of the thought of, if you don't support caregivers, what's the implication? Well, there are about 840,000 caregivers in the Commonwealth right now on average, many of whom are cobbling together their own resources to keep mom at home longer. They're paying some of that home care cost because they can't qualify, because they're just at that point where they're not able to get state home care benefits. So it's all of that together to acknowledge that if we did not have folks living at home longer, they, at least some of them, would be impacting the long-term care system in a way which, frankly, is pretty frightening. Think about the stresses we already have on Medicaid, on Mass Health, and the costs associated with long-term care. The more folks can stay at home longer, it's good policy, it's good politics, it's good emotionally, and frankly, it's the kind of thing that we are frankly, it's been a long time that we've really gone the extra mile to acknowledge the importance of caregivers. So the governor's package is good, and if you'll forgive me, I'm going to throw out one other thing. We've been pushing at ARP for a $1,500 tax credit for caregivers who actually put money out of their pocket to keep folks at home, loved ones at home longer. Average, they're spending $7,000. If we can give a little of that money back, that would be great. I want to end by saying that when it comes to the matter of income, again, the governor needs to be applauded for the simple truth that he recognizes, as all of us do who are involved with dealing with seniors, that the lower income seniors, that economically, those folks that are under a lot of pressure, they need this kind of practical relief, because sooner or later, those internal familial systems will start falling apart. Their ability to stay at in their home longer is going to erode, and we know the implications of that throughout society and in community. So for all of these reasons, ARP, and we are nonpartisan, this is strictly a message about how we recognize the leadership of the governor, and we look to the legislature. I want to make it very clear, we're working with them as well. We applaud the leadership of the House and the Senate, and my good friend Bruce Tarr, the leader in the Republicans in the Senate, Brad Jones in the House, both the Speaker and the Senate President, all of those folks who are going to ultimately make this decision. I think the good news is they are hearing loud and clear that this is the opportunity that we need to seize. And whether there are going to be tweaks in it, we don't know. We at ARP are fighting for those three particular principles in the governor's package because we know the implication will be helping the people that are most vulnerable in the Commonwealth. Thank you very much. And at this point, it's a pleasure to introduce Betsy Connell. Betsy is the she's the acting director for the Mass Councils on Aging. She is taking the place of a gentleman that many of you know, Dave Stevens, whose untimely loss we still mourn. But Betsy has assumed the role, and she's been very actively working with all of us advocacy groups to try to help on the issues that we're now talking about. So Betsy, my pleasure.
Thank you, Mike, and I'd like to thank Governor Baker and Secretary Heffernan for the inviting Massachusetts Councils on Aging to be here today. I'm Betsy Connell, the Interim Executive Director for the Massachusetts Councils on Aging, the nonprofit membership association of the 350 municipal councils on aging and senior centers across the Commonwealth. We are engaged in statewide collaborations to advance the quality of life for the 1.7 million older adults aged 60 and over in Massachusetts to support them in leading healthy and purposeful lives. One key issue the Massachusetts Councils on Aging is focused on and consistently working on is reducing economic insecurity for seniors here in Massachusetts. We have held a long-standing position for years of supporting local tax relief for seniors, many of whom are low income and struggle to pay property taxes. As we have seen property taxes skyrocket over the last few years, rising property taxes for many middle and low-income seniors are becoming increasingly harder and harder to pay. And seniors are feeling the pinch, trying to live on fixed incomes which have not kept pace with inflation. The Mass Councils on Aging encourages the legislature to act now and pass the measures that can achieve greater economic security and well-being for our seniors. These tax measures include doubling the maximum senior circuit breaker credit to lower the overall tax burden for more than 100,000 homeowners who are low income, age 65 and older. Increasing the rental cap deduction from $3,000 to $5,000, impacting approximately 881,000 Massachusetts renters, many of whom are seniors. Doubling the dependent care credit and doubling the household dependent care credit, benefiting more than 700,000 families and caregivers, again, many of whom are seniors. And increasing the state's threshold for no tax status, eliminating the income tax for more than 234,000 low-income tax filers, so many of whom are seniors. It is our seniors, the older adults of our Commonwealth, who have borne the brunt of this pandemic over the past 2+ years, being most at risk of becoming sick, being isolated from family and friends, and now with so many of our seniors facing daily challenges in these very difficult and tough economic times with inflation and the rising cost of food, medications, and services, relief is truly needed. Passing these measures will allow many seniors to remain in their homes and maintain the essential and, in many cases, lifelong connections they have built in their communities and will help to improve their economic security. Thank you, and it's now my pleasure to introduce Tim Driver, the president of the Age Friendly Institute.
Thank you, Betsy, and good afternoon to all. My name is Tim Driver. I'm honored to appear here today as part of this effort to provide critical economic help to older Americans in the Commonwealth. Across the nation, half of today's working families are at risk of having insufficient retirement income. The situation here in Massachusetts is even more serious. 61% of older single adults in Massachusetts had income below the level required to cover basic living expenses. Through agefriendly.org, a consumer-facing website that aggregates all things age-friendly, our staff, along with the site's online community, hears from older adults in the Commonwealth and around the country every day. We collect and we curate these voices and opinions via online ratings, reviews, and conversations on a variety of topics around the aging experience. It's very, very clear that older taxpayers want and need alternative forms of income and other ways to save. The tax relief to be passed along to older Massachusetts residents through these proposals will make it easier for residents to make ends meet. The Age Friendly Institute supports the moves. The Institute is a nonprofit that elevates age-friendly initiatives. It's supported by leading funders in aging, such as the John A. Hartford Foundation. These bold initiatives are just one way the governor's administration is helping older Commonwealth residents' economic security. It's also bolstering efforts on the income side of the ledger for older adults. It is supporting and it is modeling efforts to make it easier for older residents to work longer when they want to. Here's how. Governor Baker's Council to Address Aging recommended action to showcase age-friendly employers. In recent weeks, the Baker administration has done that. It is showing employers the way by itself stepping up to the plate, applying for and receiving the designation of certified age-friendly employer. This was delivered in April by the Age Friendly Institute. And at the announcement event, Governor Baker said, quote, "If you're going to want other folks to play by a certain standard and a certain set of rules and a certain set of expectations, then you need to play by them too." And that was one of the reasons why we went at this pretty hard and are thrilled to be the first state in the union to be designated as a certified age-friendly employer, unquote. Many more Massachusetts residents tell us they want to work longer, particularly when they can work flexibly. Taking into consideration what was learned during COVID, that flex or remote work is not a productivity killer, employers are more ready than ever to extend flexible terms to staff, including their older employees. Yes, many older adults want to work longer. They tell us up to 5 years longer than previously planned, but it's hard. We stakeholders can save them time and agony by giving them a path to finding these workplaces more likely to welcome them than to shun them. You see, age can be, and still is, an impediment when looking for work after about age 50. Most older adults have had to accept dealing with this as a fact of life. Leaders like the governor see the merit in stepping up and changing that, and for a variety of good reasons. In addition to it being the right thing to do, the reality is it's good for older adults' physical and mental health. And when employers like Massachusetts fill a void by helping older workers keep their skills and their expertise on the job, when they adapt to accommodate the aging workforce, and the right legislation like today's proposals are passed to help them succeed, they're setting up our economy to grow well into the future. There are more than 150 large employers on the Institute's National Certified Age-Friendly Employer list, and hundreds more in the queue, many from Massachusetts. They include Two Life Communities, Benchmark, Fidelity, LaSalle Village, Mass General Brigham, Point 32 Health, and many more. These employers benefit from improved brand equity and workforce culture, augmented diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, and they also retain staff who might otherwise have assumed at a certain age that it was time to pack their bags and retire. It's been said that Massachusetts is the Silicon Valley for innovation and aging. Through these efforts being proposed and announced today, Massachusetts has taken another step in this direction and is indeed bolstering its position as a longevity hub. There's lots more work to be done in Massachusetts to make it affordable for older adults, and that's why these announcements today are very, very welcome and why the Age Friendly Institute supports them. Thank you very much.
Questions? Can we start on topic and then go wherever you want to go from there?
Governor, why did you want to hold this news conference when you have a leadership meeting in a few hours with the people who make those decisions? So why go ahead and do this?
Well, first of all, the folks we'll be meeting with in a few hours have heard this from me, from the Lieutenant Governor, and from our administration, and from Mike a number of occasions. I think the main point here is to make clear that there is a clock that's ticking. We all know that. July 31st is right around the corner. There is a lot of work in front of the legislature, which is really important and we hope gets done. But we thought it was important to bring some of these folks who spend a lot of time worrying about a population that in many ways deserves to be heard, which are the older adults here in Massachusetts who are, for the most part, on fixed incomes and who do make up the vast majority, in many cases, of the categories that we're looking to try to help here with these proposals. And I really do hope that they don't get lost in the conversation between now and the end of the session.
Do you think it's possible it might not get done?
You never know. I mean, as I said, there's always a lot of stuff that's moving around when you get to the last 30 days of the session. And I just really want to make sure that these tax proposals don't get lost, and especially the impact it would have on our older adults here in Massachusetts doesn't get lost.
Gas tax proposal, you recently came out in support of that. You hoping that makes its way into this final package?
I've said before that there are a lot of ways the Commonwealth can go about making things easier and better for people as they deal with the impact associated with inflation here in Massachusetts, and the gas tax is certainly one. I wouldn't take any of these ideas off the table at this point in time. I think the debate on this should be wide-ranging and robust. And as I said, the Commonwealth's financial position is better than it's ever been with respect to its ability to incorporate this into an ongoing budget. And more importantly, for the folks who would benefit from this, they are in many cases a lot of the folks across the Commonwealth who are losing the most as a result of the significant rise in gas prices, home prices, rental costs, and food prices, and inflation generally.
Governor, the legislative leaders released a statement saying they're concerned about the T, they want to do hearings.
So we're off topic now, Jonathan? Is that what I'm getting here? Okay, all right. Yeah, go for it.
So they want to hold hearings on
Yep.
that, and you've taken leadership position with the T. Are you concerned about the recent challenges?
Well, yeah, of course I'm concerned about the recent challenges. And I said weeks ago that I welcome the participation of the FTA in assisting the T in what I would describe as boiling down a set of opportunities and issues and problems to deal with the safety issues. And I've spent a long time talking to the folks at the T since the FTA got here, and I think the FTA is doing exactly what they said they would do, and the T is responding accordingly. I think that's all good.
Legislative leaders, though, they say you want to control in 2015. You've been charge since then, and now you're to blame. So are you to blame?
I think there's always opportunities to point fingers. I would much rather worry about trying to make the things that need to get fixed, fixed. The T is not immune to all the issues associated with labor that are affecting virtually every part of our economy. Anybody who's been to an airport and tried to fly in or out of an airport knows that airports are having a very hard time delivering on the requirements and the services and the personnel that they're supposed to have to get planes in and out. They've been very busy too. And airlines have had issues associated with this as well. Almost everybody who's in the you gotta show up for work business is learning to live with a new normal, and the T's no different than everybody else with regard to
The
that.
lack of available dispatchers, staff shortages, that they say is on your management of the T. You say it's just sort of happening everywhere?
There's a lot of this going on around the economy, both in Massachusetts, around the country, and frankly, around the world. Do I think the T needs to deal with these and fix it? Yeah, I do. Are we going to do whatever we can to help them? Of course. Remember, all the positions that currently aren't filled at the T are funded. They're funded positions. The T's biggest problem at this point is getting people into those roles and those responsibilities and making it happen.
So what do you make of these oversight hearings then? What do you make of that? Do you think that's just political theater?
The legislature has had oversight hearings over the course of the past 7.5 years when they felt they needed to engage us directly in discussions on a variety of issues. And, I'm not surprised.
But we haven't had the opportunity to hear your voice on the airwaves since the Roe v. Wade reversal. Can you just tell us how you're feeling about this whole industry?
Well, I said before that when the original draft decision on this came out, that it was deeply concerning, and we obviously spent the time between the time of that draft and the issuance of the ultimate decision coming up with a plan that would keep providers here in Massachusetts safe and would provide relief to people from other states who came here seeking those services safe as well. And that was why we issued the executive order literally within a matter of hours of the decision itself being issued. I do believe that having listened to and heard from a lot of companies over the course of the past several days about what this decision means with respect to their workforces and their benefit plans, that there may in fact be a big opportunity here for Massachusetts to encourage some employers to either come here or expand their footprint here, because we are a state that takes this issue seriously and will be there for their employees when they need those kinds of reproductive services and supports.
On that note, are you concerned for the potential for legal battles if an employer here in Massachusetts helps one of their employees in another state seek?
This is exactly why we issued that emergency order and why we spent the previous 30 to 45 days from the time the original decision was leaked, making sure we could put an emergency order in place that could withstand legal challenge, which we believe we've done.
Is there money available, Governor, to provide extra security? Do you think that's necessary at women's health clinics?
We've had a lot of conversations with the state police, with the Fusion Center, and with many of the folks in the healthcare space about any issues associated with security or concern there. And I'm obviously not going to speak to what people said about it because that would be inappropriate, but this is something we're all paying a lot of attention to and having lots of conversations about it.
Governor, on the topic of employers, you mentioned, looking at places out of state and talking about potentially, recruiting businesses to do business here. Is that a formal conversation that's been started with some big employers in other states where, they have laws that kind of even go beyond what the Supreme Court holds?
Yeah, no, we've just been tracking some of the folks who've been commenting on this thing, and I think you could expect that we'll probably do some reach out at some point down the road.
For the T for a second.
Yeah.
Do you think that some of the state's extra money should be going towards repairs for the T or anything else to help with these directives?
The biggest thing I'm worried about on the financial side for the T is the impact that the fall in riderships had on their operating budget. And I think you'll see us file something between now and the end of the year to support their operating budget going forward, which I think is the biggest issue they have. They have tons of capital authorization. There's a lot of capital money available to support them on the repair side. The biggest challenge they're going to face is the issue associated with ridership that really hits next year because the federal funding associated with supporting the operating side goes away then.
Federal officials found 10% of MBTA track in disrepair. They found dispatchers with lapsed safety certifications working 20 hours a day, runaway train incidents. Did you know of any of these issues before the FTA made them known?
Well, the interesting thing about the track question is when we took office, there was no asset management system at the MBTA. So no one would have been able to figure out what percentage of tracks had repair issues associated with them. We built the asset management system and have been spending, the T's been spending the past 7.5 years replacing miles and miles and miles of track. The issue that the FTA had, that they raised, which is a good one, is do you have enough time currently when the T isn't actually operating between the hours of, say, midnight and 5 a.m. to do the work that's required to deal with the track questions that lead to speed restrictions that are currently in place because they haven't fixed those tracks. If the FTA has a better way to help the T think about how it uses that time that's available when they aren't actually in operation to improve the quality of the track that they currently know they need to fix so that they can lift those speed restrictions, I'm all in on that. But the fact that people actually know something about what's going on with the tracks is absolutely a good example of the work that's been done by the T to implement the kind of asset management system that didn't exist when they took office.
So it sounds like that problem was on your radar. What about operators working 20-hour shifts with 4 hours off? What about lap safety certifications, runaway train incidents?
Well, the certification issue's basically been addressed, and I think these other issues are ones that we'll be talking to the T about going forward. Again, the reason I welcomed the FTA's participation here in the first place was it would put what I would describe as a national perspective on all of these issues and give the T the kind of focus on this that it needs, which is exactly what they're doing.
Last question.
Governor, so talking to employers about Roe, are you hearing any other protections that they're asking for within your executive order, any ways to strengthen that further? And at least one state senator has called for a constitutional amendment to further codify Roe into state law. Would you support something like that?
Well, that's a really long process, first of all. And secondly, we already have a decision that was rendered by our Supreme Judicial Court many years ago that, for all intents and purposes, codified Roe as state law in Massachusetts. And obviously, we have laws that have been passed that do the same. We're always open to concerns people may have about this. And as I said, the reason we issued the executive order was we were really worried about the impact the decision we read when it was leaked would have on providers' ability here in Massachusetts to support women coming from other states seeking those services and to provide support and protection for those women so they felt they could come here and safely seek those services. But if there are other issues and concerns people have, obviously we're wide open to talking about those as well.
Abortion providers, so they requested additional funding from the administration?
I do believe there will be additional funding coming in one of the financial documents that will land here sometime between now and the end of the session, and we'll obviously support that.
Could I ask you about the government center garage real quickly? There's a finger pointing back and forth between the T and the contractor. Were there water issues under there that the T maybe should have been keeping track of?
That beam belonged to the building, dating back to the 60s when the building was originally constructed. HYM had 2 years to inspect and make decisions about how they were going to actually do the process associated with taking down that garage. I think the T did yeoman work working with HYM over the course of the weekend to make sure that that beam, which belongs to the building and belongs to HYM, was shorn up and secured so that there wouldn't be issues associated with the morning commute. That's my view on that.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, Governor.